and moved, and our move is going to be into the Taylor building, which is just across the way, and we will help you and guide you to the sessions. You have an option of 2 different sessions up next at a little after 10, and that will be with either one from a presenter from Blue Cross who's talking about some nutrition, or you can go to the Office on Aging presentation, and then again, we have a second group right after that. So it will be all upstairs in the Taylor building, and we will help and guide you afterwards. So the instructors that either brought you here or that you saw here, watch for them, because we will be out helping you get to your location for your breakout sessions. So do you have any questions at this time? Everybody's good? Okay, after Dr. Preucil's presentation, she will also ask if you have any questions. She would love to entertain questions. So be thinking about questions or comments that you would have that you can share after her presentation. All right, well, without any further ado, let's get Dr. Jenniger Preucil out here. Big round of applause.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jenniger Preucil, as Jamie just said. Thank you very much for having me here. This is fun stuff to talk about. I have been a physician for 28 years. I trained back east at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And then I went to Denver for all my postgraduate training. And it's kind of a fun story how I ended up here in Twin Falls. I don't know if anybody remembers, there was a physician here for a long time named Dr. Paul Miles, and he was a pediatrician, and he had an arrangement with my medical school, and so I came out in medical school and did a pediatric rotation for him for 2 months, about 30 years ago. And then when it was time for me to graduate, my husband, we were only dating at the time, had come out and visited me in Twin Falls and actually asked me to marry him here in Twin Falls. We got engaged. And so when we were graduating from our postgraduate work and our residencies in Denver, he said, I want to go look at Twin Falls, Idaho. And I said, I am not living in Twin Falls, Idaho. And 25 years later, we are here very happy. We've raised 2 children in this community and have enjoyed practicing here very much. When I first started my career, I was primarily interested in maternal and child health. For the first 12 years of my career, I actually delivered babies and primarily took care of young families. And in the second part of my career, I have been much more interested in the aging process. Just science evolves, interest evolves, careers evolve. And as I mentioned, I stopped doing deliveries about 12 years ago, and I have really enjoyed being super involved in the science and all that we have learned about the aging process, the aging brain, the aging body, and everything that we can do to be healthier. This is probably the most exciting time in history to be a physician. I'm sure physicians from other times in history would maybe not agree with me, but in my opinion, one thing that's so fascinating is we have almost known nothing about the brain. Almost everything that we have learned in medicine and in science have been about the body. And in the last 5 years, we have learned more about how the brain works than we knew in all of the time before then combined. So it is just a fascinating time to learn about the brain, and to start to implement some of the science around how the brain works. So this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about today. So let's talk about the very big concepts about the brain. So what are things that the brain really likes and makes the brain a lot healthier is sleep and good blood flow. And what the brain does not like and what damages the brain is inflammation. So we're going to go through these concepts in some depth and understand why these things make such a difference and cause such a problem. But the first thing we need to understand, so I think sleep is pretty self-explanatory. I think we all understand sleep. But what is good blood flow? Good blood flow means that you have clean and good veins that take blood to every part of the region that needs it, every organ in the body. And then the veins, of course, take away all the toxins and get that to the kidneys and the liver so we can get things cleaned out and create waste and have healthier bodies. So when we struggle with good blood flow, what we're talking about is that we have developed plaques inside of our arteries. Plaques are caused by, in particular, diet and cholesterol. And so when plaques are involved in the arteries, it makes it very difficult for good blood flow to get to the brain. That is also, it's very important to understand how plaques work. So our arteries are like highways, and when they're clear, the traffic runs through easily, the blood flows through easily. If we use that same analogy, what a plaque is basically road work. It's a part of the artery that's getting blocked off because the plaque is being laid down in the artery. This is exactly how heart attacks and strokes happen. A small piece of that plaque breaks off and then goes to as the arteries get closer and closer and closer to the organs, they get smaller and smaller. And that small piece of plaque then eventually blocks the artery that's flowing to the brain, causing a stroke, or the heart causing a heart attack. So let's talk about inflammation, just an overview. So inflammation is made by the immune system. Inflammation is complicated because, of course, we want the immune system to work, and we need the immune system to get revved up when we are ill. And so why does inflammation bother the brain? We're going to go through that a lot. But one of the big pieces is inflammation irritates those plaques in the arteries, causing more difficulty with blood flow and making it more likely that a piece will break off. But inflammation can also actually get into the brain and cause the brain itself to be inflamed and not work so well. So inflammation is good when it's fighting an infection, when we're ill, but too much inflammation causes us a lot of troubles. And we're going to talk about how we get that and how we avoid that. So talk about an area in science where we have not known much and we now know so much more is sleep. Again, sleep is something that we did not well understand for the last until about 5 or 7 years ago. And we have learned so much information about sleep. And as I have written up there, sleep is absolutely fascinating. When you learn how sleep works and how it affects the brain, it is extraordinary. So how the process of sleep works is the night is divided into 2 sections. So if somebody is an 8-hour sleeper, in the first 4 hours of their sleep, they are resting their body. And in the last 4 hours of their sleep, they are resting their brain. It's divided in half equally each night. So if you're a 6-hour sleeper, you get 3 and 3. If you're a 10-hour sleeper, you get 5 and 5. But the first half of the sleep is all about resting muscles in the body. The second half of sleep is all about resting the brain and restoring the brain. And so that division is interesting, and it's something you can pay attention to in your own life. It's kind of fun sometimes to realize, just to understand the science and enjoy the science, that if you have a really hard time falling asleep, and you don't fall asleep till 3 in the morning, and you only sleep till 7, your brain will feel pretty decent the next day, and your body will feel terrible. And if it's switched the other way, where if you're a 3 a.m. waker, and you've slept pretty well from 11 to 3, then the next day, and you're up after 3, the next day your brain will feel exhausted, but your body doesn't feel too bad. So it's kind of interesting that you can even notice that in your own life. So here's something that was not very well understood for a long time, but the architecture of our sleep is incredibly important. So how we sleep through the night is we sleep in 90-minute cycles all night long. And then in the last cycle, right before we wake up, the last 120 minutes, we actually sleep in a 2-hour cycle instead of the 90-minute cycle, and that's all of our rapid eye movement sleep. So in the first half of the night, in the first 2/3 of the night before you get to the last 2 hours when you sleep in REM sleep, you go from stage 1 sleep to stage 2 sleep to stage 3 sleep to stage 4 sleep in 90-minute cycles all night long. And then you come out, 3, 2, 1, and then you go all the way back down all night long. What happens in these different stages of sleep is extremely important for our brains. So fascinatingly, the brain has an unbelievable ability to heal itself. So people who struggle a lot with anxiety will spend more time in the stage 2 sleep. Stage 2 sleep is one of the spots in sleep where the brain works on anxiety, works on calming itself and bringing down the neurotransmitters that cause more anxiety and bringing up the transmitters that help us with anxiety. So the brain knows how to fix itself. And stage 4 sleep is that deep, deep sleep that we all need for energy. When you have more stage 4 sleep, you feel like you have more energy the next day. When you have less stage 4 sleep, you feel more tired, lethargic, it's difficult to get things done. This is fascinating. 18-year-olds have a ton of stage 4 sleep. They have excessive amounts of stage 4 sleep. And this is why they can change the world. They wake up every day and they have lots of energy to do things. By the time we are 50 years old, we have 50% less stage 4 sleep than we did when we were 18. That's incredible, right? That's such a loss. And by age 90, we have 90% less. And this is why, as we age, energy becomes such a commodity, because we don't have the same amount of energy that we had when we were 18 because of this dramatic reduction in stage 4 sleep. So we're going to talk today about how we can help our bodies have more effective sleep all the time. That's one of the main things we're going to talk about today. Because now that we understand this, and now we understand the importance of and I'm just giving you 2 examples there. Of course, as you can imagine, stage 1 and stage 3 have very important things that they're doing as well. And then we're going to talk now, too, about what happens in the last 2 hours of sleep before we wake up. So rapid eye movement sleep is, as I mentioned, the 2 hours right before we wake up. Most sleep experts and doctors who research sleep will tell you that this is the most important part of sleep. So if you're a 7 o'clock waker, of course, this is going to be about 5 to 7. If you are a early riser at 4, your REM sleep is going to be happening between the hours of 2 and 4. But it is the most important sleep of your night. So here is what's fascinating about REM sleep. So REM stands for rapid eye movement, as I mentioned. During that sleep, we actually have paralysis of our bodies. This is the reason why we dream and we're running in our dream, but we're actually remaining in the bed, or why we're flying off cliffs and we don't get hurt, we don't fall out of bed, because we have a hormone that's released during that time that actually paralyzes our bodies in a way. Obviously you're able to move over and roll and things like that, but in a way that you're not acting out what is happening during your dreams. So here's what's so interesting about this time of your sleep, is REM sleep is the only time in a 24-hour period, the only time in the human brain where all the different parts of the brains are on the same brain wavelengths. So we have many parts of our brain that we are using every day, And those parts of the brain are all on different brain waves in the ways that they are functioning. But during this time, every single part of the brain is using the same patterns of brain waves. So because of this, parts of the brain that cannot communicate when we are awake communicate when we are asleep. And this is why we have tremendous problem-solving skills during our REM sleep. So it's fascinating, but even before we understood the science behind problem-solving in sleep, people have known this, right? There is an age-old adage, let's all sleep on it, and we'll see what we think in a few days, right? And where this age-old adage comes from, this understanding came from, is that because we have these brain waves that are all in the same wave in every part of our brain for those 2 hours, we have tremendous ability to link different parts of the brain and solve problems that we cannot solve when we are awake. So one thing that's really fascinating during these studies is they looked at people trying to solve big problems. So one thing is, we make 1 million decisions every day, right? But let's talk about a smaller decision. I want to buy a coffee maker. What kind of coffee maker do I want to buy? It's very easy for me to make a pro-con list. I want one that I can program. I want it to make this many cups, that kind of thing. And I can easily weigh why I'm awake, the pros and cons of buying the coffee maker, buy the correct coffee maker, and feel good about it. But let's talk about really big decisions. I want to move to Twin Falls, or maybe I don't. I'm thinking of changing careers. Should I retire next year, or should I wait another 3 to 5 years? Should I get divorced? Should I move near my children? These kind of things. We cannot possibly weigh all the pros and cons accurately for ourselves when we make those decisions. And the thing that's very hard is when you're trying to make a major life decision, you may have 100 things on the pro list and only 2 things on the con list. But it turns out those 2 things are more important to you. They're 80 to 90% of your decision versus all these things on the pro list. Our sleep can do that for us. When we are in REM sleep, we are in a place where our brain can exactly weigh everything on the pro list, everything on the con list, and help us know that this is the right choice. So this is another fascinating thing about the studies that they looked at, is what they found was that when their brain gets to this place where it knows it's made the right decision, the chemistry of the brain is correct. And human beings will say, it felt right in my heart. I knew it was the right decision. It felt right in my gut. Actually, it felt right in your brain. And that's what made you know that you made the right choice in going forward with whatever decision you wanted to make. One thing that's also fascinating about the way the brain helps us heal at night is how we cope with grief, loss, and deep pain. So during our sleep, our brain is able, over time, to separate the emotions of what have happened from the actual event. So when we have a catastrophe or something it could occur in our lives that causes great loss or great pain, the reason we heal over time is because of our sleep. So during the stages of sleep and during REM sleep, every time we go into that space, we can start to separate the pain of what happened from the actual event. And when those 2 things start to separate, we can put the emotional pain of what's happened into the emotional part of the brain, and then we are able to start to work on that and heal that. And then then we no longer have the emotion tied to what the pain was, and we're able to make good decisions about how to move our life forward. So it's just fascinating when you realize what the brain can do for you. What sleep can do to help the brain be healthy, make good choices, move our lives forward, and deal with deep grief, pain, and loss. Something else that's absolutely fascinating about the brain is memory. So we have a part of our brain that's called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is what is responsible for short-term memory. So every day in the morning, in the best case scenario, we wake up with a hippocampus that is completely empty. And all through the day, things happen, and we put those things, conversations, lectures, education, your life, the things you're doing, what you need to buy at the grocery store is all in your hippocampus. At nighttime, in our sleep, the brain moves everything from the hippocampus, from the short-term memory to the long-term, which nowadays actually physicians use the word working memory, because now we understand that it's not exactly long-term memory, it's working memory. It's a part of the brain that stores the information that we collect over time. If you do not sleep well, or you don't sleep at all, or you sleep extremely short, when you wake up in the morning, your hippocampus is only half cleaned out. You still have stuff in there from yesterday. So now you only have half of the room to put new memories inside your hippocampus. And this is why when we sleep well, night after night after night, we have far better memories and we have far less troubles with dementia. But when we don't sleep well and we can't clean out that hippocampus, it's much more difficult for us to maintain new memories. So here's something that's also very interesting. I'm going to have to go faster. Here's something that's also very interesting about how sleep works that we did not always understand. So there are 4 components to how our sleep works. So one of the things that's been believed by human beings in medicine for a long, long time was the only thing that mattered was how much you slept. If you got 2 hours of sleep, you felt great, and if you got 8, terrible. And if you got 8 hours of sleep, you would feel great. And we have since learned that, yes, quantity of sleep is important, but it's only one of 4 factors, and all 4 factors matter equally. So what's equally as important to your quantity is your quality. And the quality is what we just talked about. It's those 90-minute cycles all night long, and that 120-minute cycle right before you wake up. That's your quality. You can have fabulous quantity. You can have a 10-hour night of sleep, and if you have poor quality, you will not feel well. The other thing that's extremely important about sleep, and something that we have really caused problems with in the medical field because of a lack of understanding, is timing. So our genes are very old. As we all know, our brains are very old, meaning not our particular brains, but the meaning of the way that science and evolution has occurred. We still have genes that are suited for a way different time, right, in history, like hunter-gatherer days. We're trying to evolve and catch up. But much of our brain is still related to what humanity did for hundreds of thousands of years. Modern living's really only been going on for about 100 years, right? And so the tribe never slept unguarded. They could not risk that. Somebody, a mountain lion could come and eat you, another tribe could come to attack. So they never slept unguarded. So there was so the tribe was divided into quarters. And the first part of the tribe slept from 8 p.m. to 4 p.m., 10 to 6, 12 to 8, and 2 to 10. Each one of us is in one of those tribes. We're meant to sleep from 8 to 4, or we're meant to sleep from 10 to 6, or 11 to 7, doesn't matter, same kind of concept, 12 to 8, 2 to 10. You cannot change the timing of your brain. This is what I was saying, medicine and modern living has caused huge problems with this, in particular for night owls. My mother was a night owl. She went to bed every night at 2 and wanted to get up at 10 if she could. She was a school teacher. That was incredibly difficult for her to do during the week. She would get exhausted during the week because she was not sleeping on her schedule because science didn't understand this, and because she was a school teacher and there's limits of modern living. But on the weekend, she would almost have to sleep the whole weekend to accommodate for the fact that she was sleeping on a schedule that was so not compatible with how her brain worked. In our society, we celebrate the early bird, and we are hard on the night owl. What is wrong with you? The world starts at 7. Get up, let's get going. At 7 a.m., they have not even begun to release the right hormones to wake themselves up. They have not had their REM sleep, which for them isn't even going to start till 8 o'clock, and it makes things very difficult. It has been easier for some people with the ability to work from home now, and they can set their schedule up. But you cannot change your circadian rhythm. This whole concept that you can just go to bed 15 minutes earlier, 30 minutes earlier, and work yourself to a place where you can go to bed at 10 and wake up at 6, you will never have the appropriate sleep architecture, and you will always feel like you're trying to catch up. This is something that's important for us to understand as a society and to do way better with, and recognizing that night owls cannot become early birds and early birds cannot become night owls. The last piece is regularity. We're going to talk more about this, but the way you do things every day, if you go to bed every single night at 10 or 10:30 or 11 or 2 in the morning, just based on your timing schedule, and you get up at the same time every day, your body releases the chemicals that it's supposed to release at the right time. And if you do that day after day, night after night, week after week, month after month, year after year, you will feel so much better than if you go to bed one night at 8:30 and the next night at 11 and the next night at 2 and the next night at 12:30, because you're not releasing the right hormones and the right neurotransmitters at the right time. And as we talked about, that affects your quality of your sleep architecture, and you feel much differently. Okay, so what can we do? How can we make this better? So we just talked about our genes are old, our brains are old. They want us to behave more the way that we have historically behaved as human beings since the beginning of time. Everything about our brains and our lives are set up to fall asleep outside. We slept outside as a people for 99% of the time that people have been on this planet. Like we said, modern living is a very new concept. What happens when you're outside at nighttime? The temperature drops. In the evening, the temperature goes down by at least 4 to 6 degrees as the evening is wearing on, as you're getting ready to fall asleep. So one of the things we strongly advocate is about 8 o'clock, whatever temperature you keep your house during the day, you go over and drop the temperature 4 degrees. At nighttime, we sleep so much better when it's cold. And at nighttime, if you go over and drop the temperature in your house at 8 o'clock by 4 to 6 degrees, it will be falling as you're getting ready to go to bed. This tells your brain to release all of the right hormones and neurotransmitters so that you sleep well during the night. Light is a huge problem in our culture. There has been an insomnia epidemic in the United States since 1995, which almost exactly correlates with when phones became so popular and people were on their phones or backlit devices or watching TV after 8 o'clock. Everything about the brain is set up to see light drop at nighttime. And in the evening, by the time you would actually be falling asleep, obviously it would be completely dark. When we get on our devices in the evening, when we are watching TV, when we are on a backlit Kindle or a backlit iPad, they do now make Kindles that are no longer backlit because of this research. It is doing nothing but triggering our brains to stay up. It is one of the most powerful things we can do to awaken ourselves at night and make it very difficult to fall asleep, is when we put bright light into our eyes 2 hours before we want to fall asleep. So like we talked about, whatever your timing is, you want to stop that 2 hours. So as we just talked about, we slept outside for almost all the time that we have been humans. And it gets very cold outside at nighttime. And so as we just talked about, it's extremely important for us to be in a situation where we are cooling at night. So the temperature's dropping in the evening, but we're doing nothing but getting colder all night long. So fascinatingly, taking a hot bath, getting into a hot tub, hot shower, 2 hours before you go to bed helps you sleep extremely well at night. And let me explain this, because you're saying, Dr. Preucil, you're telling me to be cool, and now you're telling me to get in hot water. And here's why. When we get into hot water, sometime in the 2 hours before we go back to sleep, it drives the warmth of our body out to our skin. We all know this. You get out of a hot bath or a hot tub and you touch your skin and it feels warm. When you drive the heat outside to your skin, your core temperature comes way down. So getting hot water right before we go to bed makes a huge difference. So caffeine is a really interesting thing to talk about. So about 20, 25 years ago, all these studies were coming out saying caffeine makes our lives better. People who have caffeine in the morning before they go to work are more likely to be much more productive at work, much more likely to be very social at work. And so we became, with all this medical research behind us and Starbucks being born, we became a caffeine-addicted society. At the same time, as we mentioned, we really started struggling with anxiety as a nation. Insomnia as a nation, which leads to anxiety. And so all of a sudden, we were in a situation where we were starting to consume tons and tons of caffeine. Caffeine has a half-life of 12 hours. So if you drink caffeine at 8 o'clock in the morning and you want to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, your caffeine is definitely starting to come out of your system, and you're probably going to be just fine. But we are drinking caffeine as a society all day long. We're definitely having it regularly after noon, and so most of us are struggling with not sleeping as well as we could be at night because of caffeine. How caffeine works is there's a substance in our brain called adenosine. We wake up in the morning, if we've had a good night's sleep, we have very, very low adenosine. Through the day, our adenosine levels build up, and this is what makes us sleepy so that we can go to bed at nighttime. When we have caffeine, it blocks the increase in adenosine, so we feel less fatigued because we have lower levels of adenosine like we did first thing in the morning. The problem with, like I was saying, if you're blocking it too late in the day, then you don't have enough adenosine at night to fall asleep. So I've been a big caffeine drinker since I was in medical school and had to do a lot of late night calls and things like that. I read these studies. I actually switched to decaf. I've implemented all this in my life, and I am shocked. I feel exactly the same now as I used to feel with caffeine. So it's just something to think about. If you do wean yourself off caffeine, do it slowly. Of course, everybody knows we get terrible caffeine effects, headaches from withdrawing caffeine slowly. Alcohol. So this has actually been for anybody who really enjoys alcohol. Unfortunately, in the last 3 to 5 years, there's just been one study after another coming out showing us that alcohol is really probably terrible for us. It's hard to talk about this science because it's not very exciting. But the truth is that the mistake that they made with studies with alcohol are really fascinating. For all these years that we believed that alcohol was probably so good for us, they were doing these huge studies with people who were drinkers and people who were not drinkers. But what they didn't do is the majority of the people in the not drinker groups had been alcoholics for extended periods of their lives. And so they had stopped drinking for 5 or 10 or 20, for whatever period of time. And those were the two control groups. In the last 5 years, they've been doing studies with even light drinking, moderate drinking, heavy drinker against people who have never drank. And it is overwhelmingly coming out that it's really not very good for us to drink. It causes troubles with cancer. I'm sure people have seen the literature. But fascinatingly, what it does is causes a ton of trouble with your sleep. So that REM sleep that I was telling you about that is so important, that occurs 2 hours before you wake up, is what is most disturbed by alcohol. So if we drink in the evenings or we drink actually any time during the day. So they actually did a study where they said, how much alcohol is the right amount of alcohol for your sleep? And they even had people doing like a quarter glass of wine, a half a glass of wine. And every study that's ever been done with alcohol and sleep shows that alcohol, even one glass of wine, beer, whatever, does impact our sleep. And so, I mean, this is all about science. Life is a balance. We're going to talk about that more. But the science does show us that it really disrupts our REM sleep. Fascinatingly, in these studies, they found that this is one of the biggest problems that alcoholics have, is that they drink way too much, they don't sleep well, and then they can't solve their problems. So they drink more. So kind of fascinating how that works. These slides are the ones, okay, that I really want to spend the most amount of time on, and then we'll keep moving. Now we'll start to move much more quickly. But so other things that we can do. When we wake up first thing in the morning, AM sunshine, extremely important. In the first 2 hours after you wake up, if you even spend 10 or 15 minutes outside with direct sunlight in your eyes, you get huge serotonin releases. And what does serotonin turn into by the end of the day? Melatonin. Melatonin is one of the key chemistries that we were talking about that really impact our ability to sleep at night. So it's so fascinating to realize that what we're doing early in the morning probably has a huge effect on how we're feeling at night so that we can fall asleep. We've talked about circadian rhythm. So everything about the body and when neurotransmitters are being released through the day impacts sleep. So one thing that's really interesting is they've done studies where they look at people doing the same thing every day. I always get up, I always have a cup of coffee, I feed my dog, I go for a walk, I meet my girlfriend for lunch. You know, these kind of regular schedules, doing things exactly the same way every day, really impacts when we release our neurotransmitters throughout the day and at night so that we sleep better. Let's talk about medication. So unfortunately, almost all the over-the-counter medication that's used to help with sleep has some form of Benadryl in it. Advil PM is Advil with Benadryl. Tylenol PM is Tylenol with Benadryl. Those are called antihistamines, the same things that we often use to help with allergies. And the problem with antihistamines are, we just talked about the hippocampus. The hippocampus does not get cleared hardly at all when you take Benadryl at nighttime. And so study after study is showing that nighttime use of Benadryl is absolutely associated with dementia because we cannot move all that information out of our hippocampus into our working memory, and so it's not cleared in the morning. So Benadryl is something we should try to do our best to avoid. Melatonin, taking melatonin in a pill form, has been shown to be helpful with sleep in elderly patients. So elderly has gotten a lot older than it used to be. We pretty much don't use the phrase elderly in medicine that much anymore until people are over the age of 85. So, and the reason why melatonin is affected so much as we age is because the pineal gland, which is again a part of the brain, releases melatonin at nighttime so we can fall asleep. As we age, the brain is not very good at releasing that melatonin. So some people in advanced age will really notice that melatonin helps them. On the whole, melatonin is not harmful, so it's definitely worth a try. Sleep begets sleep. Everybody knows this. The more you sleep, the more you sleep. As soon as you get in trouble with insomnia and you're not sleeping well, you're not sleeping well, you're not sleeping well, you're not sleeping well. It's really helpful to visit a doctor if you're having trouble with sleep. We have excellent medicines that we can use prescription-wise that help people in short term to reverse that process. You haven't been sleeping well for a while, we put you on some prescription medicine, 6, 8, 12, 14 days, and we get you sleeping again. A lot of times your brain will take over after that, and it's not something that you need long term. So something else is important to talk about too, though, is more sleep. Let's say you're somebody who has insomnia and you only sleep 2 or 3 hours a night, and Benadryl helps you sleep 6 or 7 hours. I would take the Benadryl. It's more sleep, even if it's medicated, is better than less sleep. We don't live in a perfect world, I'm sure. I'm sure everybody is aware, and things aren't always so clear-cut, right? But medicated sleep is better than no sleep. Now, if medicated sleep's getting you 20 or 30 or 40 minutes extra night of sleep, then I don't think it's worth it. Sleep apnea is one of the biggest reasons why people don't sleep through the night. It's very important, and struggle with their sleep. It's very important to be tested. Nighttime awakenings. So the #1 reason in America that people are up all night long is they sleep with animals in their room. It's extremely common, and as we age, we often have aging animals. They're waking us up, they're getting on us in the night, we're getting up a lot to get them to break, to take them out. It's extremely important for an individual person, as we're learning and we're understanding how important it is to not wake up, that we do not sleep with animals in our room. So every time you fall from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 and you get woken up, you don't go back to stage 4. You start all the way again at 1, 2, 3. We already talked about as you age how much of your stage 4 sleep you're losing, how much that impacts your energy. We can't be getting up all night long. Bladder and bowel control, bladder and prostate issues are also one of the major reasons that we struggle so much with getting up at night, especially as we age. And interestingly, what the new science is telling us is the way to fix that is probably surgery, not medicine. Female medicine that we use for incontinence increases dementia rates by 8 times. Prostate control medicines are better, but realistically, if you're up 2, 3, 4 times a night because of your bladder or your prostate, probably your best option is to get that surgically repaired. Sleep is a passive state. We have to relax. It's not something we can do. No, so you learn all this information. So this is what happened to me. I started reading these studies 6 and 7 years ago, and I said, I'm going to implement this all right away. Within 3 months, my sleep was a mess. And the reason why is I started thinking about it all the time and paying attention to it all the time. Should I not have this coffee? Should I not have this glass of wine? And you can start to become overly invested in paying way too much attention to your sleep, which can actually cause huge sleep loss. You want to, if you decide you want to implement these things into your life, you want to do them as slowly as possible, passively as possible. You choose one thing, you work on it for a while. If it works for you, you add another. In the end, I have implemented all of these into my life. They've changed the way I feel dramatically. It was a 2 to 3 year process for me. So it's not something you just go home and say, well, thank you for telling me that, Dr. Preucil, I'll get that all sorted. Something else that's extremely important when you wake up at nighttime is anything you can do to get the brain not to think about the brain will help the brain fall back asleep. So as soon as we start to think, tomorrow I gotta go to the grocery store, I gotta pay those bills, I forgot to set that flight up, all of a sudden we are actively engaging our brains and we are not able to fall back asleep. It's super important. You can tell yourself stories, you can listen to stories, you can engage in yoga nidra, which is that one where you lay in bed and you think about your feet relaxing and then your legs relaxing and having that all move all the way up. And if you're not asleep, you start again at the bottom, that kind of thing. The other thing I was saying about when I was mentioning about the alcohol, life is for living. We're here to enjoy ourselves, and we don't want to be constantly obsessed with, I can't do this, I can't do that, I have to be healthy. We don't have to be perfect. Life is about moderation. If you really love bourbon, if you really love, have a caffeine drink that you love, this is not about stopping that completely. It's about finding the balance and knowing the science. One of my favorite quotes ever is that one from Mary Oliver. Okay, so we talked some about blood flow, and we talked about how arteries work. So the reason why blood flow makes such a big difference for the brain is the more we can get good, healthy blood flow to the brain, we can get oxygen in blood there, and the more it takes away the toxins, it prevents us from having atrophy, normal age-associated atrophy, which means shrinkage of the brain because we have better quality nutrients and oxygen to the brain. And then it prevents, it also prevents something called microvascular strokes, where you have tiny little strokes that you don't know about. So blood flow makes such a huge difference. Whoops, I'm flying to, I think I missed my, okay, so what makes our arteries clean? Lots of exercise, a really good diet, we're gonna talk about it, and treatment of the diseases that cause us to have trouble with our arteries. So exercise is also an area where there's been a lot of interest and a lot of development. The big new science for people as they're aging is way more strength and weight training exercise than we ever dreamed before. One of the best ways to do this as a walker is to get Velcro weights to put on your wrists and your ankles when you walk, so you can get your good walk and you can also get some weight training. But all forms of exercise are extremely important for the brain, and because of the fact that it improves blood flow to the brain. Stretching, yoga, and balance are a lot better, are very important as we age too. As everybody kind of notices, we're not as steady. We don't have the same kind of balance as we age when we were younger. There's a great Netflix series on Netflix called The Blue Zone, where they researched the 6 areas of the world where people were the healthiest. And one of the things that they found that was so fascinating, in the Netflix series is based on this, a doctor's intense research. So it's not like the Netflix series went out and said, let's do this. It was that they hooked up with this doctor who spent years of his life on this research of studying the 6 places in the world where people live the longest. And one of the things they found was all-day activity makes a huge difference. You know, we're really not meant to be a sitting people. And when we spend the whole day exercising and moving around, it dramatically improves our health. The new information about diets is really, again, all in protein. That we need a lot more, what we talked about already, weight training and better muscles as we age. And so for protein, it's super important that people are getting at least 0.5 to grams per kilogram, but they actually feel like as we age, we need 1.2 to 2. So that is a lot of protein. That's talking about trying to get 100 grams of protein in a day. It's extremely easy to do that if you are an animal product eater. There's a lot of protein in many animal products. The problem with that is balancing animal products, proteins, with the fact that they cause tons of diets with animal product proteins cause more inflammation. And so we really want to look for plant-based proteins. And I've got a huge list there. If anybody would like these slides, I'm sure Jamie Teague would be happy to email them to you, but it gives you a huge list of all the different kinds of ways that we can get protein in our bodies without it all being animal-based protein. Of course, fruits and vegetables and whole grains are extremely important for good arteries, and they're also very anti-inflammatory. Okay, so this is the other really interesting piece of inflammation. So we just talked about how, when we talked about at the beginning, how too much inflammation can cause us problems with not having good blood flow and irritating and inflaming the brain. And so these are the things that cause too much inflammation in the brain. But here's where the new science is that's so fascinating, that as the brain has, as we have higher stress levels, our cortisol and adrenaline levels go up. When our cortisol and adrenaline levels go up, they could increase inflammation. This is why stress causes heart attacks. For years and years, we knew that in cancer. It's because when we have more stress, we have more cortisol and adrenaline, which are our 2 major stress hormones, and then those 2 major stress hormones call on the immune system to make lots of inflammation. The inflammation gets in our heart, it gets into our brain, and it causes it. And this is the reason we now understand why stress causes medical illnesses, including cancer. It damages the DNA. Inflamed proteins, inflamed bodies have more trouble with cancer. Dental health is really good for improving dental health, improves brain function. And the reason why is what we just talked about. It causes less inflammation, and then when we have less inflammation, less infection, our teeth are so close to our brain. When that's absorbed into our bloodstream, then we have more trouble with inflammation in our brain. Brushing your teeth immediately after you eat and not snacking is the way to avoid this from happening. Fascinating. Loneliness causes dementia. So we have known for a long time that loneliness impacts the brain in a very negative way around mental health, right? It decreases our really important neurotransmitters, and those really important transmitters going down and our stress level coming up when we're lonely is what leads to increased inflammation in the brain and gives us trouble with not aging well and not and not having nearly as good a brain health as we could have. Now, loneliness is, of course, directly related to mental health. So mental health, the neurotransmitters that play a huge role in mental health are dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. Those impact how you feel. They affect depression and anxiety. And when those neurotransmitters are low, it drives up your cortisol and adrenaline, your stress hormones, which then drive down your good neurotransmitters. And this cycle and this mental health disruption is, we already talked about high cortisol, high adrenaline, results in increased inflammation, inflames the brain. So one of the things they also find with human beings as we age is it is incredibly important to continue to stay engaged in your communities. People who volunteer, who become community members, who are very involved socially, whether it's in their church or with their friends or through their tennis league, and one of the things that's just not stressed enough in the importance of brain health is having fun, enjoying your life, getting together with friends and family, and feeling connected. So we're just going to wrap this section up, and then we're going to quickly go through bone health. I really wanted to focus primarily on brain health in these studies. But like we just talked about, this is all a giant cycle. When we sleep better, when we have less inflammation. When we exercise more, we have less inflammation. Exercise drives up dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So then we have better mental health, and then we have better brain health. So this is all very interconnected and just in a cycle. And now we're just going to spend a few minutes on bone health, and then we'll be set. So here's what's really, really important. We are living so much longer than we've ever lived before in history. We need our bones for so much longer than we ever have before in history. 50% of women before they passed away are having an osteoporotic fracture. That's something we have to work hard to reverse. Because when you have an osteoporotic fracture, what we're talking about in medicine is we're talking about a vertebral fracture or hip fracture. For women who have a hip fracture, the following year after they have a hip fracture, they have about a 25 to 28% rate of mortality, of actually dying. They don't die from the hip fracture, they die from the fact that they're not up and moving around and they get a pneumonia or a blood clot. And 50% of women after an osteoporotic fracture have a significant morbidity in their life. And what we mean by that, by medicine, is you're living alone and now you have to go move in with your daughter. Or you're living with your daughter and now you got to move in to a nursing home. It really dramatically impacts people's quality of life. So these are the things that make a huge difference in bone health. Regular exercise, like we talked about, in particular weight bearing, healthy diets. We're going to talk briefly about hormone replacement, paying attention to what makes people fall, and then actually getting tested for your bone density and being treated if you need to. So we've already talked about the importance of weight-bearing exercise. It also strengthens our bones. We talked about diet and all the healthy things that we want to be eating. Good muscles, when you eat protein, good muscles, good exercise, improves bone health. One thing that's fascinating though, another new piece of science, they're no longer recommending that women take calcium and vitamin supplements. The studies have shown that the calcium and the vitamin D needs to come from food. Food is medicine, medicine is food. It is important that this is what the new studies are showing, that taking it externally in pill form does not work. So the science, this is not going to impact anybody who hasn't gone through menopause, who's still on the premenopausal side, but it's just so you guys know, the science is really changing around hormone replacement therapy. For daughters and granddaughters and people of the next generation, we are really finding that hormone replacement therapy makes a huge difference in bone health, brain health. The difference is, again, life has changed. The average woman used to go through menopause at 52 and die at 65. So not having those hormones for that extended period of time was shown that the risks were outweighing the benefits. Now, the average woman is going through menopause sometime between age 48 and 52 and living another 30 or 40 years. We have to look at what that change, and we're finding that hormone replacement therapy that started during the menopausal process, that you take from that time until the time you pass away really improves brain health, really improves bone health. The other major risk of hormone replacement therapy is breast cancer. There's a 1 out of 1,000 increased risk. As we all know, breast cancer deaths have gone way down. Breast cancer treatment has gotten so much better. So nowadays, when that woman gets a breast cancer, she will almost always survive it, and she'll pass away later in her life from heart disease. And estrogen helps with heart disease. So it's really changed the face of our thought process around hormone replacement therapy. One of the major ways we don't get osteoporotic fractures is we don't fall. So it's there are many things we can do in our homes and in our exercise programs to help us not fall. One of them is, we just talked about high vitamin D diets are very important. One of the major reasons we fall is visual health. It's very important to go to the eye doctor so that we preserve our visual health. Interestingly, depression and anxiety and mental health really affects falls. And it is partly because of the way we behave in the world when we're really struggling with our mental health. It's very common when people are struggling with their mental health for them to shuffle, for them to look down, to not be bright and engaged and looking out. So isn't that fascinating? Something like your mental health can make a difference in whether or not you fall. Some of the programs that you guys have here at CSI have been so helpful. With the Over 60 and Fit program does a lot with balance and strengthening. And one of the things that's really important too is there are now excellent physical therapy and occupational therapy programs that are set up to help people prevent falls. So if you're having more falls than you feel like you should be, it's something you should definitely talk to your doctor about, because we can do specific programs to prevent that. These are things that really increase our risk. We keep talking about, unfortunately, alcohol, like we were saying, being very tiny. Smoking makes us have a lot of trouble with our bones. It's not good for our bones. And then if your mother or anybody in your family, a close relative, had a vertebral fracture or a spine fracture or a hip fracture, it really increases your risk. And then there's a whole list of medical conditions that really increase your risk of osteoporosis, but that's not your job to memorize. That's your physician's job to be aware of and test you appropriately. So what do we do to help figure out whether people have osteoporosis or thinning bones? We do DEXA scans. These are the people who should have DEXA scans. Every woman should have a DEXA scan at age 65, unless she has a lot of risk factors like we just showed on that page before. Then she should have it before 65. Any woman who's between the ages 67 and 85 who's even had a normal DEXA scan when she was 65, if she trips and falls and really breaks her wrist, she needs another DEXA scan. Because why did such a small fall cause such a fracture? And we have to be much more aggressive now that we understand the importance of treating osteoporosis and avoiding fractures, that we watch much more closely in that population if somebody's fallen and had a fracture that's out of proportion with the fall. Men who have risk, so we do not regularly do DEXA scans in men unless they have risk factors, and then they should have at age 65, and then we'll talk about treatment options. So this is the big point that I wanted to express today, is that 50% of women will have an osteoporotic fracture in their life. That's a public health crisis when 50% of people are having a problem. And like we just talked about, 25% will die in the year afterwards, and 50% will experience morbidity. Vertebral fractures are incredibly painful. We're talking about living months of your life in excruciating pain. This is a very, very important reason to watch bone density and treat appropriately. We just talked about doing bone scans so that we know and treat. We know whether or not you have trouble with your bone, with your bone density, and then treating before fractures occur. There's many, many options for being treated for osteoporosis, and most of them have very few side effects. They reduce morbidity, they reduce mortality. So this was the big study that came out just in the last 2 years that has really changed the face of treating people for osteoporosis. Because of the fact that we've always known that it caused a ton of mortality, at one point in science, actually, it was a 50% mortality rate the year after a hip fracture. So that's something we've known for a long time, and we've always known it's impacted morbidity. But this study came out showing us that if you went on medicine after a hip fracture, you had a 35% reduction of you had a 35% reduction that you'd have another fracture, and a 28% reduction in death. So we now know that this medicine makes a huge difference in impacting women's health, their quality of life, and whether they actually pass away than we did before. And so we need to be much more aggressive about treating bone density, being aware of who is having trouble with their bone density so that we don't have that problem. Yay, okay, I don't think we have much time. I think we might, oh, we're actually 5 minutes over time. Sorry about that. Okay, does anybody have any questions? I just didn't know how, I knew we were over time, so. Yes? So there was a huge study that came out, I'm sure people remember it. It was called the Women's Health Initiative. It came out about 15 or 18 years ago. And this is when massive amounts of women were on hormones, and then massive amounts of women went off of hormones. And the hormones in our country almost became, you know, like being involved in devil's play or something. You're not taking hormones, are you? You know, I couldn't, even in situations where people would go in and see their doctor and meet individually with them and realize hormones were best for them, when they would go out in the community and tell other people they were on hormones, they would be mortified, right? And it was all from the Women's Health Initiative. The Women's Health Initiative was a huge study that was done by the NIH, where it was a study where physicians were trying to figure out if women had less dementia if they took estrogen. Because they were noticing, as a nation, the physicians in this nation were noticing that their patients who were on estrogen were aging far better than their patients who were not. They took women who were primarily, in the study, they took women who were primarily in their late 60s and put them back on estrogen after they had been off of estrogen since the age of 52 to see if it would help with arthritis and bone density and muscle mass and better memory and all that. And in that study, they found out about the increased risk of breast cancer, and 4 out of 10,000 women had increased risk of heart attacks and strokes. 4 out of 10,000, that's not very many people, right? So because of that study, so it's actually fascinating. I went to an entire conference about how this was the greatest disservice, this study, and the way it was publicized in our country. It was the greatest disservice that's ever happened in all of women's health, because it was a very set group of people they were trying to figure things out about. But anyway, the answer to your question is this. If you go off of hormone, if you go through menopause and you don't start hormones by the age of 59, you increase the number of plaques that you have in your arteries. The reason why women have so many less heart attacks than men and stroke, well, primarily heart attacks, but also strokes if they stay on estrogen, is because they have less plaques in their arteries. Estrogen helps prevent that. And so once you go off of hormones, and you've been off of them about 10 years, your risk now is the same as a man's. And so what they found was they increased those plaques when they went off of estrogen, and then when they went back on them at age 68, it destabilized those plaques and made it more likely for people to have those 4 out of 10,000 heart attacks and strokes. So if you don't start hormones by the age of 59, then you're going to start to form those plaques, and then if we put you on estrogen later, it may destabilize them. I share this information with my patients all the time. I have many of my patients who say, I'm willing to assume a 4 out of 10,000 person risk if I'm going to feel better emotionally, mentally, have better bones, that kind of things. Those are individual discussions that people can have with their physicians.
Any other questions?
How does a nap influence your night's sleep?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So naps are just like timing. Some people do extremely well with naps and other people do extremely poorly. So there is some evidence to show, there is a lot of evidence to show that there's a ton of genetic differences in whether or not we do well with naps. Some people can do 20-minute power naps, and their studies around those are phenomenal in terms of the fact that they really help. So as we all know, everybody notices, we kind of get between 3 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we get an energy dip as human beings. That's the way our circadian rhythms are set up. And so our brain function between 3 and 5, this is fascinating. Studies show that most of what you get done between 3 and 5 in the afternoon, you can do in 20 minutes the next morning because your brain energy is fatiguing so much. Actually, this is you guys can tell this is very, very exciting for me, but this is another piece of information that's fascinating. The brain functions extremely well for about 4 hours in the morning, lunch, and then 1 hour after that. And really what we're trying to do in terms of brain function after that is just a waste of time. That is how our workday should be set up. We should work for 4 hours in the morning, we should have lunch, we should work for 1 more hour, and then we should be done, and we should go grocery shopping and do things that don't require a lot of brain energy. So for people who take 20-minute naps, they can really avoid that 3 to 5 decline. If you take a 20-minute nap after your lunch or at 1:30, some people really find that makes a huge difference. Some people sleep very well for 6 hours at night and then do well with a 2-hour nap. That's not something I brought up in the timing piece, but if you are a 6-hour night sleeper, you cannot make yourself an 8-hour night sleeper. That's not how it works. If you're a 10-hour night sleeper, you cannot make yourself a 6-hour night sleeper. This is genetically programmed. And so a lot of people do sleep 4, 5, 6 hours at night and then take a 2-hour nap every day. So it's all about figuring out what works the very best for you. When people struggle with insomnia, one of the first things we do tell them, though, is no naps. Because you want that adenosine to build up all day long so that you have lots of adenosine when you're going to sleep at night. So the very first thing we tell people when they're having trouble with insomnia is no naps, no caffeine, no alcohol. Until you can get that back on trace. Any other questions, or are we through?
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Preucil. Fantastic. That's just information we can all take with us, and I hope that you can take one of those with you as much as you can. Thanks. Thank you. All right. So, Luann, can you stand? Okay. Luann's going to help get you across to our next breakout sessions. We have 2, so you get to choose one or the other, and Luann will help guide you to the next spot.